Finding a great tenant is not just about filling a vacancy. It's about protecting your property, your income, and your peace of mind. But how do you find great tenants and separate them from the risky ones? In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 proven tips to help you find the best tenants. Whether you're a seasoned landlord or a first-time investor, these tips will help you avoid any potential headaches. So let's dive in. Tip number 1 is to know your ideal tenant. In fact, as a real estate agent in Toronto and the GTA, I encourage my investor clients to start with that first. Even before they buy a property, that's the first important consideration. Who is your ideal tenant profile? Is it a family with kids, a professional, a student? It's very important to be very clear. Do you want to have high credit, of course, a good stable job? It's important to be very specific so that you buy the right property and make sure that it fits and is ideal and is able to attract that ideal tenant profile. Also, knowing your ideal tenant allows you to market effectively and attract those tenants. Tip number 2 is to post a rental listing that attracts those ideal tenants. Your rental listing is what you're going to post on major websites that prospective tenants go to, like Kijiji, for example, or on realtor.ca if you're working with a real estate agent. It's important that while you're writing the description for that rental ad, you keep in mind what's important to your ideal tenant. If it's a family, for instance, what would be important to them? Would they want plenty of storage space, maybe a playground, good schools nearby? These are the things you need to highlight, for instance. Also, it's important to make it very clear what rent you're expecting for your property. Obviously, are the utilities included or not? Which ones are included? Which ones are not? Do you have certain house rules, a pet policy, a non-smoking policy? Be very clear about those things so you can weed out the tenants you don't want and attract those tenants that you do. This is your first line of defense. The more specific and accurate you are, the better. And make sure you write it like, it is an ad copy. So it's got to be highlighting what's important and written in a way that attracts your tenants. Any expectations you might have. If you're not looking for short-term rentals, be very clear about that. If you want a long-term lease, for instance, be very clear. A pro tip is to make sure you hire a professional when taking your photos. Don't be cheap about that. And what I mean by that, don't take shortcuts. Taking photos on your phone, if you're not an expert, is not a wise decision. It's better to make that upfront investment, which might be $100, $150 or $200 working with a professional, where you get really good photos and you can keep those for the future. You can keep reusing those photos to attract the best of tenants, because nowadays everyone's looking online. Prospective tenants are filtering and making decisions based on those photos. So you need to make it look presentable. And another important tip is make sure the property is clean, really clean and spectacular, so that when a tenant does view the property, they're going to be impressed and they're going to want to fill out an application. Tip number 3 is to use a rigorous tenant screening process. In this video, which is a lot shorter, I'm not able to get into all the many steps. I'll probably release a very comprehensive video in the near future. But for now, let me generalize 4 essential steps you definitely have to take. The first I recommend is to pre-screen tenants, because it does take a lot of time investigating each tenant individually. You need to pre-screen over the phone, ask important questions such as, what's their reason for moving? What's their employment situation? When are they looking to move in? For instance, how many people are in their family? These are all important because you may be able to identify whether it's a good fit or a bad fit right there and then. For example, if you have an applicants where there are 5 friends looking for a place, but your property is just a 2-bedroom condo and can't accommodate that many people by the bylaws and and is just too small, you know that it's not a right fit. If their tenant is looking for something 3 months from now, but your property is presently vacant and you need somebody to move in hopefully within 2 to 4 weeks, it's not a good fit, and you can let them know. So you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting their time. So it's really important. Also, you may look for red flags, like if they're hesitant to provide documentation. If it comes to that, if you realize they might be a good fit and you need their credit report, you need pay stubs, etc., and they refuse to do that, you know that's a red flag, and you can deal with that in that first pre-screening phone call. The second step is to request the documentation you need. As I hinted at, you're going to need 3 pay stubs, most recent pay stubs to verify income. You're going to need a letter of employment, a recent one, a full credit report with score, which has to be recent as well for obvious reasons. You're going to need a rental application filled out. All this documentation you're going to need so that you can take the third step, which is to verify it. I have many videos on how to do, tips on how to make sure that you avoid tenant scams. So I encourage you to look at those videos. They're very helpful because you want to avoid the nightmare of moving in the wrong tenant, moving in a tenant that's going to give you potentially serious problems. So you want to protect your income, as I mentioned, your peace of mind, and your property. And lastly, I would say is definitely set up a Zoom call or a meet up in person. If you find everything else looks good, you need to do that to make sure you're comfortable and they're comfortable, and really just to address any questions they may have and any questions you might have as a follow-up to the process. Tip number 4 is have a strong lease agreement in place. This is really important. If you're doing it yourself, make sure you conduct exhaustive research in terms of the clauses that you need to have. Of course, you need to outline the specific rent in place, what's included, what's not, in terms of utilities and amenities. Is there a parking space available? What are the responsibilities in terms of maintenance? Do you require your tenant to shovel and do the lawn care? You need to specify that so there are no issues and problems after the fact. What's the policy around subletting? There are certain laws within your province that you can never contradict when you draft your lease agreement. For example, in Ontario, you can't ask for a security deposit. You can ask for a key deposit. So there are these subtleties that you need to be aware of in the business. So, of course, if you're doing it yourself, do that research. If you're working with a realtor, make sure they're like myself, specializing in lease agreements and investments so that you're protected and that you have everything in place so there's no ambiguity. There's clarity for the benefit of your tenant and for you as the landlord. My 5th tip is to trust your gut always. Trust that little voice, that instinct you have within yourself while maybe during the interview process. What does your gut say? It's important. Of course, you have to be careful. There is a human rights code in place in terms of valid, legitimate reasons for rejecting a tenant. Yet, beyond navigating that, which is probably a topic for another video altogether, you do have to trust your gut. It is a relationship that's going to extend at least 1 year or possibly many years down the road. So you have to be comfortable, just as the tenant has to trust their gut in terms of whether they feel comfortable with you as a landlord. It's very important to know that you don't feel pressured, that you don't feel that you've got to make a decision. And that also lends to another important point that I'll just add, a pro tip, is it's better to keep the property empty than to settle as a landlord. Remember, the first tip was to know your ideal tenant. Don't settle and take someone else. Make sure you do everything you can possibly do to attract that tenant and accept the tenant that you want. So there you have it. 5 tips to find amazing tenants for your rental property. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe, hit that bell notification, that like button. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I look at every comment. If you have any ideas for future videos, I'm listening. And if you're a potential investor, if you're looking for a property to buy or sell here in Toronto in the GTA, definitely reach out. I'm a local real estate agent and I'd love to help.